Pandora's box is about to open wide.
Hello, this is Pandora's box. Nice to see you, everyone. Have you guys seen that mental Star Wars hoverbike that can go like 124 miles an hour?
No.
Yeah, it's not actually a Star Wars hoverbike, but it's essentially like a hoverbike, and it can apparently go to speeds of 124 miles an hour.
Damn!
Don't you think that's freaking nuts?
What is a hoverbike?
It's a bike that hovers.
Yeah.
How the hell does that work?
I don't know. Look it up, guys. Look it up. It's mental. I saw a video of someone hooning it on this hoverbike. I have I don't really understand like the physics of how it works, but it's literally like a freaking like one of those like bikes that they use like in say like the Forest of Endor on Return of the Jedi.
Right, like a speeder.
Yeah, but they can go 124 miles an hour.
That's too fast, isn't it, for flitting about?
Yeah, I haven't like looked into it properly though, so I don't really know like what do you know what I mean what the energy source is. Like what is like
hydrogen.
What's creating the momentum? You know, I'm not really sure, but yeah,
free energy.
Bullwinkle, look it up.
Tesla coil.
Yeah, freaking, I wouldn't be surprised.
Nikola Tesla electricity.
Look it up, Bullwinkle, and look for hoverbike. Have you found anything?
I found it. I'm watching an ad right now.
You're watching an advert for it.
God damn it.
Yeah, I don't think it's been like produced. I don't think it's been released to like the public yet, but like you can watch videos of it online.
It? Mate, that's mental.
Let's have a look.
Oh, I've got another ad. We're getting delayed. I think this might be. It's like in the desert.
Right.
And some guy that
I think I watched one of some guy in the forest. I'll get YouTube up on here and see if I can get it up.
I might
just
be
so
into that one.
Yeah, you are. Hoverbike.
Yeah.
Hopefully this will come up quite
we
quickly,
all want to see it. Let's all see it.
Let's all see it, ladies and gentlemen. Oh yeah, this is it. This is it. Oh no. Yeah, I think this must be it. It's not that one. It's this one. This is the one I was on about, the Volonaut air bike. Pandora's box. We also release this as a podcast on Spotify and YouTube. So if you want to watch the video of this mental hoverbike, check us out on YouTube. Just type in Pandora's Box podcast, or on Spotify. And these are these new hoverbikes that can go 120 miles.
That's crazy.
These things are mental, man. Let's face it, it'd be fun to have one. I mean, you wouldn't have to worry about getting a flat tire or anything, would you? Like river, lake, no worries. Quite like a cool little design as well, isn't it? It's like quite small, isn't it?
How do things work with like air control and stuff? Would you have to like? Do you know what I mean? Like we've got rules for the roads, but and I know they do for planes and stuff. You have to.
I don't think you'd be allowed probably very high. Like you're only allowed to go like 10-foot ground clearance or something like that.
That's like almost the thing that people think about with flying cars, isn't it? Like we could actually make flying cars. It's just the fact that people would just probably drive into buildings.
Surely it would be very expensive as well to produce just like mass manufacture flying cars.
You'd have to have like tubes in the air that people fly through, and then just like
you know
what I mean, like almost like tube roads or something.
You see them on in Star Wars, I think in Coruscant.
Really?
It's like a massive like city planet. Yeah, I think you see them sometimes in Coruscant. Yeah, this thing's nuts, isn't it?
I love how epic the music is.
Yeah, isn't it? Pretty cool, isn't it? I like how there's no information about it, like verbally. It's just like non-stop
just like
shots.
Watch it in action.
I wonder how similar it is to say like riding a motorbike. You know, in terms of like what you're doing.
It looks like it's blasting air out the bottom of it, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's mad to me that it can generate enough power to not only lift your body weight and the whole entire bike, if you want to call it a bike.
Yeah. It looks like a bit like a fly there.
Yeah, but then it can also go at such high speeds. That's like mad that they can produce that amount of power. What do you reckon that little rod is?
I reckon it's a gun.
Little laser gun.
I love it that he's doing it over the water just for that full effect of just like the air blast.
Do you reckon the director and the producer were like, mate, stay there.
Make sure you flick some stones about and make sure you like...
Yeah.
Do you reckon he's in one behind, or it's probably a drone actually?
Yeah, probably a drone, yeah.
It's probably Tom.
Yeah, it probably is, I wouldn't be surprised. Mate, he does some like big stuff nowadays.
Yeah.
He did the latest Range Rover advert that's on the telly at the moment. He went on tour with London Grammar, the band, and just like went on the whole entire European tour and just like did mad drone footage of them playing on like live and that, and going out into the crowd and then coming back and like all circling the bands and stuff.
Awesome.
It's quite. I like the fact that it's quite small. Do you know what I mean? Like you could easily just keep that at home.
It's not
you?
massive. It's not like sticking out loads at the back and stuff. It's just like kind of like his body size almost.
It's like half the size of a motorbike.
That looks like the Bad Wolf.
I wonder if it feels like sketchy.
Do you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah.
I wonder if it feels sketchier if it just feels the same as like driving an actual motorbike.
Oh look, someone's dressed up as a stormtrooper and then gone on one. Look, like a forest trooper. Someone's gone in the forest with one and dressed up as a freaking scout trooper. And they've put in the little Star Wars sound effects.
Volonaut.
Mate, that is well good.
Is this a thing by Volonaut?
I don't know. Should we have a look?
It doesn't look like it, does it? Looks like
Yeah, actually
it
is.
Yeah.
I love that they did that.
Mm-hmm. Subscribe, man. Thanks.
Should we see what other products
later?
Oh, they've got 3 videos out thus far. I think this one is the one that I saw because I remember it was through the forest.
Volonaut.
This is mental, isn't it? You'd have to be so careful not to crash into a tree, wouldn't you?
I wonder what the insurance is like on something like that.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, pretty cool though, isn't it, guys? Mental. I feel like the Earth's in a very strange place at the moment, isn't it?
Oh man,
it's like a tale of two halves. Do you know what I mean? On the one hand, like you've got like quite bad economies and things are very expensive and stuff like that. But then on the other hand, we've got like frickin' stem cell treatment, hover bikes being made. You know what I mean? It's quite like extreme event of like on both ends, isn't it?
Definitely.
And then I like hear like about some mental like medical treatments that are coming out and stuff like that. But
and like the integration with AI and like the medical system and how they'll be able to just completely diagnose diseases, and some micro AI things will be able to analyze your body and tell you exactly what's wrong with you, like better than a doctor could and stuff.
Oh,
and
it reminds me of like, you know, when you like take your car to like a mechanics and they just like plug in and do diagnostics.
It's almost like that, isn't it? You could get some diagnostics done on your body and be like, oh yeah,
yeah, that's nuts.
Those hormones are a bit off, or
yeah, man. Yeah, last week obviously we talked a lot about World War II because it was like our VE Day special.
That was a banger.
Yeah, it was cool, wasn't it? And afterwards, I was thinking about. Just more about World War II and about maybe a couple of things that we didn't talk about. And one thing I think is really interesting to sort of just sit and contemplate about World War II is to sort of think about like the moral implications of World War II. And what I mean more specifically about that is that obviously towards the end of the Second World War, obviously the Allies started winning. And the more it came to the end, that the point where the Nazis surrendered, we were just winning more and more and more and more. And as a result, the things that we did to them were so one-sided that some of the events have become considered controversial, as in like, you know, like were the Allies right in doing that, you know? And I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer to it, but it's interesting to think.
What, you mean like decimated, like
I'll give you an example. The most controversial thing that the British did, arguably throughout the whole entire Second World War, was the bombing of Dresden, which was a city in Germany. And we basically carpet bombed the whole entire city, and it caused 25,000 people to die in like one air raid. And apparently from like a militaristic point of view, it went off as like it basically couldn't have gone better for the British, because apparently it was like perfect weather that night. Because the Germans, like, there's so many of their factories had been bombed by that point, and they were they were fighting the Russians on the Eastern Front, they were fighting the Allies on the Western Front, and they a lot of their stuff had been decimated during like the Battle of the Bulge, which was their like they basically, after the Allies had won D-Day, Hitler put a lot of effort and resource and soldiers into what's now known as the Battle of the Bulge, which is basically he then tried to defeat the Allied forces that had invaded the West again after D-Day, and then they did pretty good for a few days or about a week or something, and then ultimately got their ass handed to them by the Americans and the British and the Canadians again. So by that point, their resources were so drained that they didn't really have like enough money or planes to be sending up into the skies to try and shoot down our bombers. So basically, I think it was something mad, like, I can't remember the exact figures, but we sent hundreds and hundreds of bombers over, and something like 7 of them got shot down. So it was like, that's considered like amazingly successful.
So at Dresden, they still had like a military like presence there. Like
the Germans?
Yeah.
Well, they were using the railway. The railway station and stuff at Dresden was used to transport a lot of resources to the Nazi soldiers that were fighting on the Eastern Front against the Russians. And there were factories around the outskirts of Dresden that were used in, like, you know, the making ammunition, guns and stuff like that. And obviously all of that stuff is like crucial. So, but what's really controversial is that the Allies they didn't even necessarily like specifically target the railway station or the factories. They were like, we're just going to flatten freaking Dresden essentially.
Wow. Dresden's going.
And I think as well, because you've got to bear in mind as well, earlier on in the war, if they did try and target, say, like a whole massive area like that, because the Germans were still doing a lot better earlier on in the war, and well, obviously the first few years they were literally winning, so we were on the back foot. But like you were just hoping it was reasonably successful. So I think, you know, you'll probably stick into that almost like blueprint of just trying to do the best you can like every single time. And then by that point though, like the best they can was like amazingly successful. And they ended up but it's considered quite controversial because Dresden was considered one of the most like architecturally beautiful and like artistic cities in the whole of Europe. Obviously it's completely changed, it's completely different nowadays because it was essentially ruined during that bombing, but you can actually watch like really old like footage of Dresden before the bombings, and it does look stunning. Like the architecture is amazing. Apparently it was like, in terms of like theatre, art, music, it was like one of the main centres.
The hub.
Yeah, it was like a massive hub for it, and you know, it wasn't really a particularly militaristic city or anything like that. But yeah, so the British bombed it. 25,000 people died in one night. Apparently, it was like literally like a perfect storm for conditions that night as well. So, you know, the Allies dropped the bombs, and then they dropped small incendiary bombs, which basically were caused to just like basically set the city on fire. And then apparently, because it was like a really nice, apparently it was quite a warm evening, but there was like but there was also like, it was like windy, but not too windy. And apparently it was like, when you get the right perfect conditions, you can create like firestorms.
Tinderbox.
Yeah, and it basically caused a firestorm. Apparently the whole entire city was so hot. Sorry, it was so hot. The whole entire city was so hot that people were running through the streets trying to run out of the city, and their shoes were melting on the concrete, and then it was burning their freaking feet, and then as a result they were like falling over and then like melting into the concrete.
Damn.
And apparently there were like tales that some people were like running past like buildings, and where like the inside of the buildings were on fire, that it almost creates like this mad suction. It's almost like these mini fire tornadoes that would be in every building. And if you ran past a doorway that was open or a window, it's quite mad, isn't it? The suction would be powerful enough; it would suck you in. Apparently, people say they would like be like running with their family or friends, and then people that were like too close to them would
like almost how a chimney like pulls the smoke up, like, you know, and it's like got that much,
and then they just never be seen again.
Damn.
So it's considered very controversial because obviously, like,
savage.
25,000 people died, pretty much all of which were civilians. And, you know, it's very hard to wrap your head around that in like a moral way, isn't it? You know, because you're thinking like, yeah, like, you know, we were at war with the Nazis. And don't get me wrong, like, you know, we do need to remember that the Nazis were democratically elected into office. So I do think the German people do, you know, I mean, they need to take accountability for that. It's not like the German people were subjugated by the Nazis. They voted them in democratically. So, you know, a lot of people like in Dresden surely would have voted for the Nazis to come into power, and the Nazis did atrocious things. But even so, like, most of these people, you know, weren't that different from me and you, if you know what I mean, from us guys or anybody listening to this. You know, they were going about their day.
Members of the public.
Yeah, they'd been at work. They were going home to have family with their dinner. You know, and they were little children. You know, like, you know, like, it's just like, it's quite. You know, you're thinking about the moral implications of that. Like, was that warranted? Was that necessary? And I say there's many different you know, like different ways of looking at it. One thing that's crazy, and obviously the Allies aren't to blame for this at all. Apparently, the Nazi officer that was in charge of the defences of Dresden was essentially just like not competent. And he just, like, at the beginning of the war, he didn't think that Dresden would ever get bombed because he was like, why would they bomb here? It's just like an art centre, essentially. So he just didn't bother like making very many bunkers. Like, say, like, you know, in London, for example, they were like really good with making bunkers and everything. So even though the Blitz was awful,
it's almost a bit like Pearl Harbor. You're saying they never expected them to attack there like directly.
Really good comparison. Yeah, so like, in the Blitz there was lots of places where people could go. So as soon as the air raid sirens went off, as even though it was terrifying, and even though loads of people died during the Blitz, people would go underground. You'd wait until you'd get the green light, and then you'd go up above board again. But because they just hadn't been made in Dresden, there wasn't really that many places for people to go.
Yeah.
So
savage.
So they've got their own administration to blame for that. Do you know what I mean? They didn't, like anywhere really was fair game. And like, the Nazis had decided to use this railway station on the, in the city to like use to transport to stuff on the Eastern Front. But
it's crazy, isn't it, that they wouldn't do more preparation? Like I was speaking to my
they definitely should have done.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely I was speaking to my nan this week about VE Day because she was I think she was 4 at the time of VE Day. And I was speaking to her all about it, and like my granddad, because my granddad actually he was a boy who lived in London on the docks, and he was
is this your dad's dad, or is this?
No, this is my granddad George.
Oh, so, the one that passed away recently.
Yes, yeah. So he was an evacuee from London,
right.
But actually lived on the docks, which of course is like where most of the Blitz was taking place.
The docks got bombed immensely because you got to think at the time. Sorry to interject, but. Obviously, the British Empire was still a lot more a thing at the time, even though it was coming to the end. But we had like massive imports in the docks in London, which obviously are head docks in the whole country, and it was just filled with everything from like silk from India, from like Asia,
trading
all over the world. It was just like so that got bombed like madly. But sorry, go on.
He was saying, my nan was saying that he had tons of stories from like when he was there before he got evacuated, where like. He could remember the air sirens going off and almost like looking in the sky and thinking it was a bit of a game, like being a kid, being like, "Oh, this is a bit like mental," and his dad like sitting him down and being like, "This is not a game," and he had photos as well. After he got evacuated, the house next door to them got hit by one of the bombs, literally just a pile of rubble.
Wow,
crazy! And like he had little stories like how. He was always really mad at the Germans because they blew up his chippy on the end of his road.
Well, you would be, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
I think that's fair enough. Like, let's face it, it's the little things in life that make us happy a lot of the time, isn't it? It's like going to one of your favourite restaurants, like, just things, the little things that are like you look forward to in life, like, oh, me and my missus are going this place at the weekend. Oh, I love that place. Like, it's like, just look forward to things like that, don't you? But what they did have apparently one big bomb shelter in Dresden. But this is really dark. But I think it's important, that we talk about it because I don't think it's good to ignore history. So there was one big shelter, and apparently, that I can't remember how many people went in there, but a couple of thousand people managed to fit in this shelter or something like that. But the whole of Dresden was so obliterated, they had to like dig the entrance to the shelter out of the rubble after the bombing, and it took a good few days because Dresden was so hot that it was like a frying pan. As soon as you take it off the hob, do you know what I mean? It's still going to burn you, like like when you touch it at first, you need to wait for a while. But it was that on like a mass scale. So apparently they waited for a couple of days. Eventually, it was cool enough. The concrete and everything was cool enough that they could dig out the rubble and open up the hatch. And they were hoping that they just find all these people in there. Apparently, Dresden got so hot during the carpet bombing that inside all they found was bones and then just this like brown and green liquid.
Oh my god!
They'd been liquefied.
Oh my
savage!
God. They just cooked in there alive.
They were completely just liquidized by how hot it was.
So they literally wouldn't have made any difference even if they were.
They would have been better off not going in there because at least if you got caught up in the firestorm, you'd die very quickly. It would just basically been incinerated quite quickly.
Wow. Yeah. I guess in a way they almost had like made their own little oven.
Well, yeah, because obviously, and it would have gradually heated up as well. So at first you would have been like sweating and been like, oh, I hope this ends soon. And then it would just been like the panic would have set in, and it just keeps getting hotter and hotter.
And you can't get
and
out,
hotter,
and that's just
and
a pile of rubble outside as well.
And let's face it, the weakest people around you, like the elderly and the children, would have started, unfortunately, perishing before you. So it would have been It would have been like a horror movie. Yeah. I mean, it's so traumatic to think about it. It's very hard as a human being to think about it, isn't it? And to think this actually happened, because the more you think about it, the more you put yourself in that situation. Like, I think as like people living in a civilized world, which, let's face it, these people were living in one of the most, a very civilized city in the West. They all had jobs very similar to the jobs that we all did today. they probably never really thought for a second that might be how they would meet their end.
No.
And the same way that we don't, you know?
Yeah, man, I can't look with all the things that happen in the world even now, and like the states of certain wars, or the way that people are in certain countries, like with women and stuff, and like stuff that I see, and like the brutality, and even Africa and all of that. I'm like, I've never experienced something like that in my life, and I can't even imagine it. But like, you know, that stuff does happen, and it's like it's crazy how we have lived such a sheltered life in regards to that. But it does happen, and yeah, like how horrifying something like that must have been for people who were like ourselves, like never going to experience anything like that, or would never experience anything like that before.
And I think yeah, again, I think we shouldn't take for granted the civilization that we've grown up in, and actually relatively how fair it is. And I can't remember who said it that made me think, yeah, actually that's a really good point. I can't remember if it was Jordan Peterson or something like that, or what's his name? It's like Warren something. Anyway, they said, like, in the West, we tend to think that our way of life is the norm and anything else is the exception. But that's not true. Like, if you look at nature, if you see the brutality of nature, or if you read up how, you know, brutal things were in medieval times, or in certain countries where it's a lot more like survival of the fittest. If you're bigger and stronger than somebody, you're going to subjugate those people to your will. You know, there's not that fairness and stuff like that. Like, that is much more the norm than our society. But because, as you said, we've grown up almost like sheltered, we convinced ourselves that this is the norm. But really, we should be fighting tooth and claw to maintain our civilization, because if that crumbled, all of a sudden,
all the Mad Max films and that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
it would be a rude awakening.
It would be. And,
it would be a rude
it's very
awakening.
possible. It is the norm. Like, it's more of the norm of history, isn't it? Of like what's happened.
I mean, you hear about what happened to start the India-Pakistan war recently, where just like those Islamists just crossed the border and then just like ended up like beheading some random civilians and stuff. And apparently, like
is that how it started? I didn't even know it. So it's like,
I'm pretty sure. I haven't looked into it massively, so we'll fact check in a minute, because obviously I really don't want to give give out any false information. So we'll fact check all these things in a minute, ladies and gentlemen, because I say I want to make sure that we're giving you the correct information. But I think what happened was something like some Islamists crossed the border into Kashmir, and I think it was like a group of people, some of which I think might have even been on holiday in that, so it wasn't even just all Indians. And then I think they like basically lined them all up with weapons, and then they made them recite verses from the Quran, and if they said like a word wrong or anything like that, because obviously, like, if you're freaking you don't read that or whatever, do you know what I mean? Not they'd be like, you have to recite it word for word perfectly, and then if they didn't, they'd behead them on the spot. And then obviously what happened is, after they did this, they then retreated into Pakistan, and then India said, we want all the people that did this atrocity to be held accountable for, unless you hand them over to the Indian authorities, we're going to like take action against you as a country. And Pakistan were basically like, we're not going to hand you these people, we're not going to help you like find them and give them to you. And then that's when India went to, then invaded, or I don't know how to describe it, because I don't know if they actually did invaded or if they started bombing them, or but basically there's a little war happened, didn't it? And it's still obviously really tense at the moment. I think they're currently under a ceasefire at the moment. But yeah, I mean, just imagine that. Imagine being on holiday in India.
There was that video that went viral, wasn't there? I'm not sure what the context of it was, but I know it was to do with this conflict. And it was the guy that was recording, it went viral on Twitter, I believe. He went on like a zip line.
Right.
And he was recording himself on the zip line,
I've seen
just like
this.
Laughing, smiling, going across, having fun.
Yeah.
Looked like, a nice enough place, nice day. People are like sat picnicking and stuff and like that.
Yeah.
And do you just hear like pop, 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 pop in the background, and people are just like getting killed in the background.
And he doesn't realise he's doing like a selfie video, and he's like, because he's like looking at himself and in the horizon and that, and there's people underneath like fleeing for their lives. It's freaking nuts.
Insane.
That is madness.
Yeah, it's actually insane. Yeah, so let me have a look. Brief conflict started on the 7th of May. India launched missile strikes on Pakistan.
I think almost like part of the crazy part about this is how quick it can happen as well. Like you can just feel like you're just having like a normal day, not the sense of danger, and then it can just be over that quick. So India launched missile strikes on Pakistan on the 7th of May in response to what's known as the Pahalgam attack on the 22nd of April by militants in the Indian-administered Kashmir. The militants killed 26 civilians, most of which were tourists.
The attack intensified tensions between India and Pakistan as India accused Pakistan of supporting cross-border terrorism. Pakistan denied the allegations. India,
So is Pakistan mostly Muslim then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pakistan's all Muslim.
Is it?
They don't accept anybody that's not Muslim. That's the thing. I was totalitarian states, and that's why a lot of people get annoyed with some of those countries, if you know what I mean, because it's very one rule for one rule for another. So obviously a lot of them go to other countries deliberately to try and convert people to their religion. But if you went to their country, say as a Christian or a Hindu or a Jew or whatever, and tried to convert them, you would literally be killed because you would be seen as like an absolute blasphemer. There'd be no tolerance for it whatsoever. And they're very open about that, or at least most of them are, and they will say things like, well, yeah, because we don't tolerate blasphemy in our society. And it's like, yeah, but if you're in a Christian country, they think the same as you do about your religion. So why are you allowed to come to a Christian country or a Hindu country and do that to them, but then not expect... It's all right for you to say behead people if they try and do that, but you wouldn't obviously want to be beheaded if you did that, but you're doing that all the time. So it's like, you know what I mean? You can't have those double standards, can you?
And it's only because of other religions or places and countries being more open-minded that they can even be there in the first place.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. Like, as we said, almost like our society that we need to protect, because it's like we're the more enlightened societies. I know a lot of trendy like college kids might be like, no, we're awful, but we're actually not. Like, I mean, no country's perfect and no society is perfect, but actually the fact that we can openly diss our government, the fact that we can, have all these different religions and people from all over the world living in a place, you have, gay people can walk in the streets, we have all these different rights for everybody, and, it's a very liberal society.
It's a bit worrying in the UK with the things like people getting put in prison and that for like tweets 100%. And stuff. Like that's getting more scarily like not free.
I completely agree with you, but this is what I'm saying though, like
we're losing a bit of that.
Yeah, when I say like we need to like appreciate our society and like fight tooth and claw to keep it, like when you hear things like that, it's like a red flag for me, because I'm like, that's not free. That's not
what
good.
We stand for.
That's like that's like a police state.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, this is what you have to believe, and if you don't believe this, we're going to lock you up.
And did you see that thing as well?
Who decides that?
Yeah,
who decides what's right and what's wrong? That's the whole point.
Yeah, and even like freedom-wise as well, someone getting arrested for having like £1,000 cash on them. And it's
I think I saw something about that, but I didn't really look into it.
Yeah, I didn't look into it much as well, but if that's true...
What was the thought process behind that, do you know?
I guess it's like not being able to explain, like most people who carry cat or not, that's another, it's just a misconception. Like you should be able to, if you want to take your money out of the bank and not have, have more responsibility yourself over your money, there's nothing wrong with having cash. We still have cash in our society, but people, because cash isn't as traceable, think that it's more for nefarious like reasons, like drug dealing or tax evasion and stuff.
So they
like
just
that.
assumed that this person was probably like a drug dealer.
Yeah,
that's quite an assumption, though, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. And it's like, so it's getting to the point where we won't be able to even like carry cash or have that autonomy, and that's like a bit. That's
worrying. Very strange, isn't it? Like you wouldn't really think anything on paper of carrying around £1,000 on you. Like, don't get me wrong, not that I think it's something that people do on a regular basis, but I think. Like, hey,
if you're going to jail for it,
if you're a wealthy businessman,
no, you wouldn't think you get arrested for it.
I know for a fact that, like, it's not uncommon, especially back in, like, say, like the noughties, 90s. Like, some successful businessmen, would carry around £1,000 in cash, in the
or at home have like £1 million in cash in a safe, because like you're being more autonomous about the way that you hold your money rather than trusting it in a bank, because they get, like we've seen as well, they can just kind of shut your bank account if you get like red listed or blacklisted or whatever. And it's just like, that's a bit of a scary concept. And that was a good thing with like certain, like you think about like cryptos, it's almost like it's giving you the digital like ability to like move money around still just all around the world, but you're autonomous with it yourself because no one can take it away from you if they haven't got your code or whatever. Like, I like that idea, but then you get like governments that are getting like scared of that and that are like, oh no, we need to do it as a central bank digital currency still, so that we still have control over the people with it. And it's all a bit like, it's a bit weird, man.
The thing is,
like
as
you say,
well-
it's a bit of a weird place to be in.
Yeah.
Like the technology's all there, but also the ability to kind of like hold you down with it a bit. It seems.
Also, it's like the point of the police shouldn't be to be like a private army for the government. The
No.
point of the police should be like, well, let's face it, it's publicly funded. They get paid by taxpayers' money. That's how the government afford to pay the police. And they're there to make sure that nobody gets murdered, raped, that if somebody gets something stolen, they look into it
There's
so they
some
can bring
accountability in
they can bring the
society.
thieves to
Yeah.
justice and try and hopefully retrieve your goods. All these things. They're not there like if you have
To
£100 million
enforce
at home, what it's nobody's business, really. Do you know what I mean? As long as you didn't steal that, it's nobody's business.
But it kind of feels like when you live in like just a normal society, whatever the rules are of that government, it's like you've got this like kind of perception of freedom, but really, like, you know, that someone could just come into your house and just like take all your money. Like, if it's got the government behind it. Like that, it's a bit of a scary concept to think that. Do you know what I mean? Like you've got you've got to have it there because there'd be anarchy if you didn't.
Yeah.
But you're not really free as well. You know,
Yeah.
that someone could come in. Yeah, even with like the BBC, like, you know, your TV license thing. It's like I never watch normal TV. I'm like, I'm not paying a TV license, but someone can come around your house and be like, I need to check, like, you know,
Yeah.
that, you know, and it's like, I don't know, I find it all a bit weird. I'm like, I think
it's weird as well.
Yeah.
Also, I think the BBC has become a more and more of a corrupt organisation as the decades have gone by. I think, you know, we're far from like the glory days in like the 40s and stuff, where
just
like
broadening
BBC,
people's minds of
and it's
things that are out there.
They clearly, like most news sites, unfortunately, in the world, whether it's CNN, ABC,
Pushing a certain
Fox, in
agenda
America, yeah,
almost.
yeah, exactly. And then it's like the BBC are awful for it, like awful for it. They do basically take sides and have agendas, and then they try and push that narrative out to the public, and then try and sell these things as fact. So, you know, they twist their own narrative on anything rather than unbiased reporting. And I think that's why so many people nowadays, you know, unless you're, I think a lot of old age pensioners are still caught up on that thing where, like, well, if it's on the news, then I believe it because it's the news. But
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, but that's a bit of a weird way to think about it. It's like,
that's
well,
getting less and less and less more like.
it's a bit like that thing when you're a little kid and it's like, what? Why did you do that? My friend told me to do it. When they jumped off a cliff, would you do that? And you're like, no. It's like the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's
it
like the
is.
same thing, but with like, it's like, well, just because they tell you to do it or they tell you it's right, doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Like, unfortunately, you know, it'd be nice to think if that was the case, but that's just sort of like a bit naive. I've got some more information about what's called the Palagam attack, which was a terrorist attack in India. So it was an attack on tourists by 5 armed terrorists near Palagam, the Indian administered Jammu and Kashmir, in which 26 civilians were killed on the 22nd of April 2025. The militants mainly targeted Hindu tourists, though a Christian tourist and a local Muslim were also killed in the attack. The attackers, armed with M4 carbines and AK-47s, entered the tourist spot in Baisaran Valley, surrounded by dense pine forests. This incident is considered the deadliest attack on civilians in India since the 2008 Mumbai attacks. The Resistance Front, the TRF as they're known, which is believed to be an offshoot of the Pakistani-based UN-designated Islamic terrorist group known as Lashkar-e-Taiba, initially claimed responsibility for the attack. But TRF released a statement that the attack was in opposition to non-local settlement in the region resulting from the abolition of the special status of Kashmir. However, later, after India declared war on Pakistan, the TRF later denied involvement in the attack and blamed Indian cyber intelligence for earlier reports that it claimed responsibility. Sounds to me like they were backtracking and they just didn't want to take up the responsibility. Previously, TRF has claimed responsibility for several attacks on Indian-administered Kashmir. The militants singled out the men and asked for their religion. If somebody would claim they were Hindu or Christian, they would then be shot. The attackers also asked some tourists to recite the Islamic Kalima, a Muslim declaration of faith, to identify non-Muslims. Of the 26 people killed, 25 were tourists, and one was a local Muslim pony ride operator who tried to wrestle a gun from the attackers. The tourists included several newlywed couples, and the men were shot point blank in front of their wives. Awful, isn't it? The attack intensified tensions between India and Pakistan, as India accused Pakistan of supporting cross-border terrorism and suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. Don't know what that is, to be honest. I think it's basically Pakistan rely on India for a lot of their clean water. So I think India basically were like, we're just going to cut this off to you then. I think Pakistan started panicking then. They also expelled Pakistani diplomats and closed the borders for Pakistan. Pakistan rejected these claims and retaliated by suspending the Simla Agreement, which restricted trade and closed airspace to India. A standoff between both countries led to a military conflict on the 7th of May when India launched airstrikes on Pakistan. But yeah, now they've reached an uneasy ceasefire for the time being, hopefully. But
It's a tense time in the world, man.
yeah, again, a bit what we were saying about the people in Dresden, like imagining like being one of those people in the essentially the oven, what was supposed to be the shelter. Imagine being able to be like, let's go on our honeymoon to Kashmir, Like, I mean, people go on holiday to India all the time. It's not like a crazy thing. It's not like, you know what I mean? It's not like a crazy thing. We hear in British society.
It's one of the most but when you want to go and find yourself in that, go to India.
You hear about all these like thousands year old temples, and it's quite like with like all their deities like Ganesh and all that. It's quite cool, isn't it? It's like all these Buddha.
Yeah, I'd love to go at some point.
Yeah. But then you wouldn't think like, oh yeah, let's go on holiday to India, and then you get shot point blank in front of your missus. Imagine that, you've just got married. Imagine how traumatizing that would be for your newlywed missus.
Oh man, it's so savage.
Yeah, getting back to the main point, like, you know what I mean? It's really important, I think, that we like fight for our freedom and try and fight to maintain, our society as it is,
Especially when that thing of like, when you get too comfortable, you become weak, and like our society is breeding that comfort, and it's like, but their societies of like where there's more these extremist views in that, it's like it's a different way that they act and think, and that more extreme like kind of viewpoint like breeds more like violence and stuff, doesn't it? So it's like they're almost going more down the brutal, violent like thing, and like we're becoming weaker so that we can't actually like defend against that,
because it's a bit like what happened during the latter stages of Rome. It's like Rome at its height, like they had the best trained army, and it was like, it was almost like, don't get me wrong, the Romans were brutal, and they obviously put a lot of people into slavery, including loads of people in Britain, obviously subjugated our country. Literally, it's called Britain because of the Romans, they named it Britannia. But all of that stuff. But they also were the top civilization in the world at the time. And had like the greatest mind, the greatest military. Obviously, what happened is they were top dogs, and then as the centuries wore on and on, they become complacent. The people, the
crumbled from the inside out.
The military starts getting weaker. It's hard to get the good military because a lot of people would rather just drink wine and go to the theatre all day and go to orgies in Rome. A bit like basically people are doing the same equivalent in this civilization.
Netflix and
it's easy to McDonald's. Netflix and chill and McDonald's. The same way it was drinking wine and
not like work on the farm all day and actually like raise your cattle and work in the fields and become strong and lift hay bales and actually like work for the life that you live. We don't do that anymore. Meanwhile, we just chill.
Meanwhile, all the Germanic tribes and the Visigoths and the Goths that were still living a much more like brutal lifestyle, and they were basically all surrounded Rome. So the Romans were like, no, we're the most powerful nation on the planet. Nobody could subjugate us. Oh wait. There's a lot of infighting in Rome.
Brutal Germans coming.
and just the same as today, there was a lot of like political upheaval. Political people were always getting assassinated. This Roman emperor's died. Who's going to be the next one? Who's going to be in the Senate? We're going to impose this law. We're going to impose that law. Everything's like pandemonium. You're not taking enough seriously, like the enemy at the gates. And then what happened? Eventually, Rome got sacked, and that was the end of the Roman Empire, pretty much. The Eastern Roman Empire hung on for longer in Byzantium, Constantinople, until hundreds of years later, and then the Ottoman army, the Ottoman Empire invaded, turned Constantinople.
Who's the strongest and most brutal?
Yeah, they turned Constantinople into Istanbul, converted what was the largest cathedral on the planet, the Hagia Sophia, into the largest mosque on the planet, which it still is to this day, obviously.
Madness. And
that's just the way it is. That was the final nail in the coffin, basically. Now, obviously you can go to Italy and go to the Vatican and stuff and see remnants of it, but I mean, it's like it's just like a relic, isn't it? Which is what I'm concerned is, I don't want that, say, to happen to the way the West is today. I don't want Britain to one day be seen as a relic of like, it's just all of our ideals and the way our life is now. Like, going to the cinema, going out for nice meals, the freedom to walk around. Like, mate, I don't care if someone's freaking gay. You know, what you do on your own time, mate. You know, you can bum who you want on your own time. So why does it bother me? But, you know, I mean, that freedom of you can do what you want as long as you're not hurting anyone.
Yeah.
You know, just it's that free society of you know, I would hate that to come to an end, you know.
And it's mad as well. Like, what I think in the UK, say, compared to someone like America, like, they're obviously... The UK military and the American military, like, both, like, really strong, and, like, you know, our army and everything. But, like, I feel that in the UK, like, our army and our military, like, stuff that we have is very disconnected from normal culture and normal, like, society and normal people. Like, you know, we're not allowed guns here unless it's like that, you know, it's super to get it, you got to jump through loads of hoops and that. But in America, they've obviously got their rules over there, that, like, where civilians can kind of have guns.
Is it the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment? Fourth Amendment?
Yeah. It's some amendment.
Right to bear arms. Yeah, basically.
And it seems like there's less. I know that their military is, like, insane in that over there as well. And there will be a massive gap between civilian and military person, but they've still got more of that intertwined with their society, I think, than say we have. Like, we've got, like, this military presence that could protect us, but we're so far gone from it in normal society. It's like, it feels a bit vulnerable to me. Like,
I completely agree with you, and I think it's really strange, because I think as British people, we've always had a self-deprecating attitude in society, and it's one of the funny things about British people, and it's one of the funny things about our comedy in a way, you know, is that we're very self-deprecating. We're not like the Americans. We don't have that almost, it seems to us, almost like outrageous confidence of, like, hi, I'm Chad and I'm amazing, you know what I mean? It's like, we're like, that's very taboo in the UK. It's like you tend to downplay yourself and take the mick out of yourself more than in general.
I am God's gift.
But I think that's almost like leaked in a really negative and toxic way into, like, politics and everything, to the point that not only do a lot of people try and make out that we're this awful nation now, but also it's like almost taboo. If you told a lot of people that you wanted to say join the British Army, a lot of people would almost put you down for that and be like, that's really corrupt, man. Like, you shouldn't do that. That's really, like, oh yeah, you're just going to be like a government puppet and you're just going to go around the world shooting people, are you? And it's just like, that's not what it's about. Like, it's about defending the nation if we need to, you know, and almost like to trivialize that and make out that that's what joining the army is so
it's only that's given you the opportunity to be where you are right now.
And it's like, it's so disrespectful to, you know, you read about World War II, for example, and you hear about how many thousands of soldiers died during World War II. Not just soldiers, but you hear, during the Blitz, over 40,000 British civilians were killed in the Blitz in total by German bombers. And it's like all the soldiers went to war to try and stop that happening, so that people like us, that were just like us, would not get bombed and killed by the Germans, and to try and stop Operation Sea Lion, which was Hitler's plan to invade Britain, from happening. Like, the British luckily won the Battle of Britain, you know, mainly from our insanely good RAF that we had at the time, all those amazing fighter pilots mixed with our greatest brains that came up with all the radar defenses and everything else like that. But it's like all of those fighter pilots that died defending Britain, like, they should be honoured, and they weren't joining it to, like, be these, like, awful people. They were doing it to defend everybody that they loved and defend the whole entire nation. And I think we've lost that a lot. And now, not only has it become almost like, I think a lot of people would almost, like, frown upon you if, say, like, joining the military. Not saying everyone. I still think there's a lot of people that support the armed forces, but I think there's a certain section of the population that would almost, like, frown upon it. Not just that, but I think it's even maybe not appreciated to the extent that it should be on a governmental level. And as a result, say, like, wages aren't great to join the armed forces. And as a result, I know for a fact...
A systemic weakening of the British...
Yeah, and I know this for a fact because I remember reading recently that it's gotten to the point now where it's becoming an issue, and as a result, the government are now trying to backtrack. But, you know... a little bit like what's been happening with nurses for a long time in the UK. Basically, the armed forces, regardless of Navy, Air Force or Army, they're not paid enough. They're not given enough respect, both by the government or...
Is it as big anymore as it was?
No, this is the problem. So they're not paid enough. They're not given enough respect, either by the government or the general population. As a result, a lot of people are leaving the Army, Navy and Air Force. at a time where global tensions are high, and now the government are already going, we should probably put a bit more incentives into joining the armed forces. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I mean, I went to the cinema on Saturday, and I said to Em, I was like, oh, you can tell they're low on recruits. Man, there were like 4 military recruitment ads for trailers in the cinema. It was like, join the Royal Navy, join the family, visit the world. It'll change your life.
That's what my dad did.
Yeah, do you know what I mean? But it was all this stuff, and I'm like, you can really.
It did as well. He did. He saw the world.
Yeah,
and became a man.
And that's how your granddad met you. Yeah,
exactly.
If it wasn't for the Royal Navy, you wouldn't be here.
The brutal life of like something back then. Say my granddad living in Edinburgh and stuff, like the Coogit in Edinburgh, and like it was brutal. It was like very poor, like super poor. There was like 10 of them in like a 1-bedroom like flat, like stuff that you can't imagine now. But it was a way of like escaping poverty a bit and stuff. Like it's like it gave people discipline. It gave people like freedom. It gave people money. All this stuff. They got to learn. They got to travel. Like absolutely loved it. Like some core values and everything that you learn in that as well. Meet your wife. In another country.
Quite
like,
exciting for a young man.
It's crazy, but it's just it doesn't seem like that now.
No.
It's like things are easier, but they're also harder as well. Like it's weird. Like you used to be able to go to work and as a man be able to like feed your whole family and like be the main bread earner, and like the mum could stay at home. That doesn't even feel like an option now. It's like Meg's getting to the end of the maternity now, like literally like next month, and we're like, well, she needs to start working or doing something more again because my wage can't sustain all of us. And it's like that's just a weird situation in itself.
Club,
and and it is. It's like it's just madness that like it's easier and we got more stuff and everything, but it's harder to sustain your family. You're getting pushed away from the military more because it's not that desperate that it was almost a bit out of depth. Like the other things, like all the good things were almost a bit of a byproduct. My granddad didn't know that was going to be the case. He's just like, this is something that's
I need to escape Edinburgh.
I need to escape Edinburgh. I need to escape poverty, and this is going to be the thing that helps me do that. The
you can
easiest
get away
way.
from Edinburgh.
And it was all the other stuff was almost like a byproduct.
But in those days, I think because you were given a reasonable amount of respect for, say, joining the armed forces, and it was still considered an honourable thing. Do you know what I mean? It's like because in the back of your mind, especially so at the time when your granddad would have served in the Navy, the Second World War had only just finished, essentially. So it was fresh on people's minds. It was a fresh experience. We really appreciated the armed forces at the time and realised that these aren't bonehead idiots that are just there to try and like kill people and that. No. Actually, having reasonable defences is a really important part of a civilization. It's like a natural deterrent to other aggressors that might try and take away your freedoms or anything like that, or impose their will on you. And there's that respect of like, hopefully it won't have to happen, but this Navy personnel or this Army personnel or this RAF personnel, if a war did start, they have basically signed on the dotted line that they would give up their life for any civilian in the UK. And that's something that's really like quite, to me, that's quite like a humbling thing. That's a very respectable thing. It's a very, like, not like something that should be downplayed. And I think I don't like that. It's hard to give an accurate idea of how what portion of society it is, like in terms of percentage, because they always talk about the vocal minority, don't they, on social media and that's like a lot of the most radical people that regardless of what area of radical it is, are usually the ones that shout the loudest. But as a result, on social media and in media in general, it often seems that more people have radical views than they actually do in society, which is obviously a good thing, because most normal people aren't preaching their opinions online all day and aren't being aggressive to people and pushing for these mental ideologies. Most people are just going about their business, sharing a picture maybe that they went out on the weekend with their missus or their mate or their kid, or do you know what I mean? Like, it's
just the ones that are really like they need to get it out there. So like,
So as I said, it's hard to actually put a percentage on what percentage of the population it is, but I think it's worrying. As I said, there's a certain part of the population that have these like worrying views where it's like they think that like the worst thing you could do would say join the armed forces, or it's the same people that tend to say have like a worryingly high opinion of communism compared to capitalism. And every way of doing thing in life, there's nothing's ever perfect. The same way that a human isn't perfect, that capitalism isn't perfect. But if you, it wasn't that long ago when we were essentially born, me and you, Drew, obviously not Bullwinkle, that say like the fall of the Berlin Wall happened. You ask somebody that lived on the east side of Berlin what their life was like compared to somebody that grew up on the west side of Berlin. And in layman's terms, if for somebody who don't know what I'm on about, obviously East Berlin
Russia side
was communist because it was under the Soviet Union. The West Berlin was capitalist because it was West. It was owned by, not owned, but it was more of the rules of America and the UK and stuff like that.
You can see when you go over there just how like ridiculously different it is. Like the West feels so much more colourful and exciting, and then you step into the East and it's like so grey and depressing.
That's it's a way to just see it like in real life, like in a natural city. It's like split down the middle. Like what is going to be like that? What's it going to be like?
Two different ideas.
It's crazy.
So the thing that almost like frustrates me about it is it's like it's not that complicated. You know what I mean? But a lot of these people, young people especially, almost like still pushing like this extreme communist view. Somehow would be better for our society, in that the capitalist way is like the more corrupt way. Yeah. And as I said, don't get me wrong, there's areas of corruption in anything you do. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is, unfortunately. But I think at the end of the day, part of being like a realization, it's important to realize as like an adult, is it's not about trying to find something perfect. It's about trying to fight to make something as fair as it can be. Do you know what I mean? So nothing's going to be perfect, but I know for me personally, I would much rather live in our society that we live in now than, live in a communist society. You ask somebody like, Ruta, obviously grew up in Lithuania under the Soviet...
And like Cami as well, like my dad's wife and stuff, like...
obviously like
Russia and Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union, and how mad it was.
Can they still all speak Russian? I've interest. So it just
and like they both speak. Most people speak Russian and Kaz.
Yeah, there you go. That's mad, isn't it? To this day. But like like Ruta grew up in Lithuania under the Soviet Union. She goes on about how awful it was. Like she never saw a fat person until
just
she moved.
Not like you haven't got much. It seems. It was
just, you go to the supermarket, all the shelves would be bare.
Grey and droll.
And it was the same in Poland. Poland was exactly the same.
Yeah,
the Iron Curtain.
You think of the people that would be at the top of the society, like the people who are actually in control. They'd just be living like Westerners anyway.
Exactly. And that's such a good point. And I'm so glad you said that, because I wasn't even like thinking to bring that up. But the irony is, as I said, with the communist society, is while the 99% of people would be living in absolute poverty, that top 1% were living no different than the people than the people in the top 1% of capitalist societies anyway. They probably had gold. The gold.
It's just like more for me. They are just like the epitome of capitalists, almost like you know what I mean, of like what you would do if you had whatever you wanted.
That almost like dictatorial rule. Having a poo in a gold toilet while everyone else can't afford to buy a carrot. Like that's crazy.
And just on the army thing as well, I was just thinking it's quite funny. Like imagine, say if you're like distrustful of the government or something, and like we're getting weaker as a society and stuff, but like we actually are losing the skills that we need to be able to break away from that. Say if we were like if something happened, like we've talked about it before, about like needing survival skills, needing to know how to catch food, needing to know how to like do all the things that will keep you alive. But like you go to the army, which is like a government thing, and it's like you learn all those skills. It's almost giving you the skills to like break away from the government even more if you needed to, things really hit the fan. Like
it definitely seems like at one point in time there were two sort of options that people would go down, and that would be sort of looking towards getting a career or a university, and the other option, which was a major option, was becoming becoming a man and going to the army, and either way it was the next progression of life after school. That's not really the case anymore.
No, it's not.
You sort of like finish school and you go,
degrees that you can
I'm going to go into a career, I'm going to go into uni. You don't even really contemplate like the other
won't get you
option.
a job.
And you can see how like every generation since the war, it's like every generation vastly there's less a percentage each generation of people that are joining up. So like I think like in my old man's generation, say people that were born in like around 1960, let's just say 60s, late 50s, 60s, probably about 50% of people, maybe not 50%, but 40% maybe.
Do you know anyone
joined
from our school who went? I can't even think of one person.
I think maybe one or two people in our year did.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, that's crazy.
Isn't it? Two.
I think maybe one or two people did. I know that, like, I know he wasn't in our year, obviously, but I know, like, Luke Palmer's older brother, Ben Palmer.
Oh, yeah.
Who was in year 11 when we were in year 7.
Brendan as well, who Sav knows.
For some reason, that just seems really random. Brendan.
Yeah,
I know Brendan did.
You'd have met him as well at some point. Yeah, I reckon you know.
Brendan.
He was friends with, like, with Craig and... not Craig. What am I on about?
Craig,
Jake, like Josh's brother, Jake, like that Brendan Roberts or something he's called.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
oh right, he's friends with Jake Ayers.
Randomly, like, bought a house in Canada, but it shows you, like, as well, like he's got so much money now. Like he like right. The way that he did it, I think he went in the Navy and got, like, quite high up, but because and this is something you hear as well for people that say go in the army and that, like, you've got everything that you need paid for you, your food,
that's what I was thinking,
and all that stuff. So the wage that you get, unless you spunk it all,
just getting sent home.
Yeah, so he just bought loads of Bitcoin with all of his things. He just kept buying Bitcoin, and literally was in the army getting everything paid for him, or the Navy, and then so he's just minted, like, bought a house outright in Cannington and stuff, and would just, like, have these, come back, and stuff like that. And I was like, that's a good way of doing it.
That is the good thing about it, isn't it, in a way? It's almost like, because everything, you've got your food, you've got your bed.
That's mostly what you will spend your money on, like when you've got a job.
You've got, like, your gym on barracks.
Like, part of your training. You need to do a lot of physical exercise and work and that. And
that's it. So it's like you got pretty much everything you want there. So your wage is just getting sent into your bank account at home. But you're, like, everything that you're doing day to day is considered part of your, that's just part of your work. It's getting paid for. So it's like, that is, in that regard, it's probably one of the easiest professions to save money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, if not the easiest profession to save money, But yeah, no, I think it is a shame. And I think also another issue we've got nowadays is that because for the, like, people that say potentially joining the armed forces, the people generally do have such a distrust of the government that it's another deterrent to join the armed forces, because they're thinking they don't trust that whoever the prime minister is essentially, like, let's put it this way, right? If you join the armed forces, would you trust Keir Starmer?
No, this is the thing, and this is when I heard about, like, this 100-year agreement of, like, of giving Ukraine all this money and stuff. Like, for me, I was like, that decision to, like, 4 billion or whatever over the next couple of years, whatever it is, like, it's just like, and putting troops over there, saying, okay, we're going to start providing troops and things. It's like, I don't get behind that. Like, no matter, like, there's a lot of people that would, but then there's a lot of people that wouldn't as well. And I'm like, something like that. I'm like, to think that you would just have to honour that, and you'd be, like, sent to say, like, Ukraine and fight against Russia and stuff.
And again, I think it's one of those things that I think you could maybe, I'd have to ponder with it more myself. But off the top of my head, I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong answer with it. But yeah, I'd have to ask myself, like, would it be worth, say, like, my daughter growing up without a dad for me to give my life in Ukraine? Yeah. Like, I don't know what I think about that. The best case scenario is that, like, hopefully people would tell your daughter as she was growing up that, your dad was a hero and died for a good cause, hopefully. But I mean, how much of a consolation is that to her that she has, like, hopefully good memories, really good memories of you from, like, earliest memories, but then you're just not around. You're not there to look after her. You're not ever there to protect her. You're not there to give her guidance. You're not there to give her 10 quid or 20 quid. Here you go, love. What I mean? Just everything that a dad should do. You're not there for, like, so how, and at the end of the day, do
you believe enough in that thing that you were supposed to be fighting for?
So it's almost like you've destroyed your family, and you've lessened the quality of your child's life. But on the flip side of that, do the government or does anybody in the higher ups actually really care that you've died? Probably not. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like there's a bit too much of a disconnect at the moment. Like, do you know what I mean? If, like, there was something really honourable and dignified about, say, I don't know, say, I don't know, being like a Royal Marine at D-Day or something like that. I just don't feel like it's necessarily the same now. I know it's a very complicated subject. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not trying to say it's not, because I guess the argument would be that, we declared war on Germany because Germany invaded Poland. Do you know? So in that regard, you could say, what's the difference between that and say Russia invaded Ukraine? Why shouldn't we declare war on Russia? So I know it is a very complicated subject, don't get me wrong. It's just hard, isn't it? Because I know that with, say, Poland, we had like an official, legal binding agreement that we said, if you ever get invaded, we will... basically, if somebody goes to war with you, we will by default go to war with them. I don't know if we have something like that with Ukraine, and as a result, do we have that obligation?
No.
Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure.
It feels like a very different situation than the Poland thing.
Yeah.
Just like from my naive,
yes,
it doesn't feel the same. And like when you look into all the reasons behind it and all that stuff, and like NATO creeping more towards like Russia over the years, and like saying that they're not going to expand.
Yeah, see, I've heard that, but like I've heard some people say that that's rubbish, and I'm not a big enough expert on it to really have a dog in the race on that. Yeah, because I've heard that. And then other people say it's not true. So I'm like, I'm not sure, because I think it's good to play devil's advocate, isn't it? It's always good to play devil's advocate. So I'm like, but I mean, let's face it, Putin is a dodgy character, and it is a fact that, say, like opposition to him have been assassinated and stuff like that. Like, really, on paper, they should be democracy. But it seems that, like, how long is Putin been in power now? Like since like the 90s or something crazy. And it's like, but it seems like whenever there's an election in Russia, they still sort of say it's an election, but like nobody really tries to actually oppose Putin, and if they do, they usually tend to conveniently die somehow. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, and I mean, if you look back, again, if you try and use the Second World War as a good example. So one of the reasons that the American forces dropped the atomic bombs on Japan was because America were planning for a full-scale invasion, like militaristic invasion. They knew that it would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, which obviously Americans were really hesitant to do that. They were like, we really obviously don't want to lose like hundreds of thousands of US troops. But, the Manhattan Project was going on in, I can't remember if it was Nevada or if it was New Mexico. Anyway, the Manhattan Project was going on. That was the code name for the creation of the atom bomb. And they basically were like coming to the end of it, and they were like, yeah, just so you know, like, President, we're going to have these atom bombs if you want to drop them on Japan. And at first they were like, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to like cross that step of like, because you open up a can of worms then, which they did do obviously ultimately, because the can of worms being nuclear weapons becoming normalized, which is the world we see now. But originally they didn't want to. They were going to invade Japan. And Japan reached out to the Soviet Union because historically they had a good relationship with the Soviet Union, and they said, like, would you basically not back us up militaristically against the US, because obviously the US and the Allied forces and the Soviet Union had basically a pact. They just defeated the Germans together, but they were like, basically, would you vouch for us and just basically get us almost like to allow America to like not invade us and let us keep everything we have now, but basically get them to almost like bugger off. And the Soviet Union didn't respond, and instead they sent they had like Joseph Stalin had meetings with Winston Churchill and I can't remember if it was President Roosevelt or President Truman, because President Roosevelt died while in service towards the end of the Second World War, and then his vice president, President Truman, became president. But either way, he was like, no, I want to invade Japan with you, and I want to do what we did with Germany and just carve it up, and we'll just have half each. But Winston Churchill and America were like a bit concerned about this, because although obviously they were very, very, they were still at war with Japan, and they were also really, really glad they just basically defeated the Nazis, they were also really concerned about the rise of communism. And obviously the Soviet Union was massive, absolutely massive, and the Soviet Union were basically like
their footprint.
And it was the end of the Second World War, which allowed the Soviet Union to absorb countries like Poland and Lithuania and East Berlin. So they took like half of Germany, Poland, Lithuania, took all these places, and they were like, yep, this is part of the Soviet Union now, and they were almost like looking to expand. So they were almost being like very, you know,
Sneakily.
they're like just trying to expand, and I mean, what eventually like to take over the world. So obviously, like the Western leaders were like concerned about this, and so as a result, they were like, we can't really allow the Soviets to just like chop up half of Japan with us, and that's not really what they wanted anyway. That like America wanted anyway. They didn't want it to be like essentially like absorb half of Japan. They wanted it to do it a bit more diplomatically and stuff like that. So they were like, right, what's the quickest way that we can end the war? Because Stalin was basically, he was getting his troops ready to invade Japan. So he wanted to invade from the north while the Americans invaded from the south. And it would have caused like hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers to die, hundreds of thousands of Americans died. The thing is, the difference is because Joseph Stalin was a typical, almost like a bit of like a tyrannical dictator, he didn't really care, a bit like at Stalingrad, we were talking about last week. He had, obviously, because the Soviet Union was so massive, he had a lot of soldiers. He had millions of soldiers, but he just didn't really care. He was like, as long as it can achieve my aim, like, yeah, just throw it at him. It's like ants. It's like ants dying, you know what I mean? It's like, as far as he's concerned. But obviously, Roosevelt was like, oh, mate, not only is this going to be freaking mental, but this is going to end up being the same thing that happened in Germany. So that's when they made the decision to drop the atom bombs. They were like, we need to end this war now before Russia can basically get in on it, or the Soviet Union can get in on it. So that's when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and then they dropped the bomb afterwards on Nagasaki, and that forced the Emperor of Japan. So it wasn't even like the President of Japan or anything, or the General. It was the Emperor of Japan, who was seen as like a deity. Even this in itself is quite fascinating. So the Emperor in Japan was seen as a deity, right?
Wow.
So if you were a Japanese person, you weren't allowed to look at the Emperor. If you looked at the Emperor, you'd be like killed, because it was considered like looking at a god. So if there was ever a parade where the Emperor would come through in his like, you know, his like majestic car, and it was all decorated and everything like that, you can see videos of like the Japanese, and they're staring at the ground, because if you raised your gaze, you'd be killed. It'd be considered blasphemy, and nobody had ever heard his voice. And then the only way that the Japanese people, because like, you know, a lot of them are very fanatical, would accept surrendering would be if they heard it from the Emperor themselves. And there was this bit, even after the bomb that dropped in Nagasaki, bearing in mind that like both times, by this point in the war, by the way, America had destroyed over 60 Japanese cities. Don't you think that's mental?
That's insane.
Over 60 Japanese cities.
Japan's not that big either, is it?
Yeah. I mean, it's not, relatively speaking, no.
Yeah.
They killed, we don't know the exact numbers because it's impossible to tell, but the Americans had dropped so many bombs on Japan at this point already that they'd killed somewhere between 350 to 500,000 civilians.
Damn.
That's mad, isn't it? When you bear in mind that, say, like the Dresden one, that's our most controversial one, killed 25,000 people, which is still a hell of a lot of people, but compare that to 350,000 to 500,000. And then, yeah, they obviously, but because the Japanese government and the military, they had like a meeting, and it was like, I can't remember how many members of the cabinet it was, but basically it was split 50-50. 50% of them wanted to surrender. The other 50 were like, no, we are samurai, we never surrender. So they were like, right, well, the only person that can decide then is the emperor. So they were like, they said to the emperor, I can't remember his name now, like, what should we do? And he was like, I will address the nation. And then it's considered like a famous part of Japanese history, because up until that point, nobody had ever heard the emperor's voice, and they'd never seen the emperor.
The power?
I think it's just something you were born into. I know, it'd be a good thing to look it up. I don't actually know. Look up, how did the Emperor of Japan come into power in World War II? But he seems to actually have been quite a wise man. And he said, no, we're going to surrender because I'm not going to have my subjects like being killed anymore. Like, if we continue, we're like basically just like causing our absolute obliteration. So I can't remember, it's got like a mental name. Maybe look at this up as well, Bullwinkle. But they call it something like, oh, it's really poetic.
That day, the Emperor spoke.
No, it's like more, but yeah, something like that. But it's more, it's something like the day of the angelic voice, or something mental like that. And he addressed the nation. He was like, "It is time for us to surrender, to survive, it's like save our culture and all the rest of it." And that's when
I'm going to watch that speech with translation later.
Yeah. And then as a result, the war with Japan ended, and then Joseph Stalin obviously didn't get his wish to like get half of Japan, and then as a result, America then helped the Japanese rebuild Japan into a democracy, and then just put loads of American air bases there and that, so that if communism ever did become too much of a threat, Americans would just have all these air bases to like just frickin', send right over over modern day Russia.
It was called the Dual Voice Broadcast.
the dual voice, like JEWEL, the dual voice.
That's kind of mental as well. That day, the 15th of August, is marked as VJ Day.
Vag Day.
Victory in Japan.
Yeah.
So the emperor's name was Hirohito.
Oh yeah, Emperor Hirohito.
Hirohito. It says the path to the chrysanthemum throne was predetermined. He was the son of Emperor Taisho and was proclaimed crown prince in 1916. His father's ill health even led to Hirohito serving as regent in 1921, further solidifying his position as heir apparent. So yeah, just like a royal family sort of thing.
Just sort of like, just a hereditary.
I've got another question as well.
Yeah.
What were China doing in World War II?
Too busy getting destroyed by the Japanese.
Right.
So the Japs basically just brutalised the Chinese during the Second World War and just absorbed loads of their territories and were basically like, yep, yoink, we're going to have this now. And obviously they were like planning to be essentially control all of Asia. So they just like conquered loads of territories in China and also like places like Cambodia, Vietnam. And they had during the height of Japan during the Second World War, they were just all new Japanese territories, and they had it. And obviously, if say the Axis powers had won the war, I guess Hitler would have like controlled all of the West, and the Japanese would have like controlled all of the East. So Japan would have been like Hitler's allies and would have been the top dogs in Asia, and then Hitler would have like owned all of Europe and everything like that. Yeah.
Did China not have the sort of size that they have now then back then?
No.
Because obviously now they're like the biggest population.
China were our allies obviously at the time.
Yeah.
Which is obviously now it's like crazy because obviously we're like really concerned about China nowadays. They're like always trying to freaking hack us, aren't they, and stuff like that, like cyber. They're like, I can't remember. There's like a thing, isn't there? And it's like
they're the kings of copy, aren't they? Like just copying things. Like,
well, they just like
crazy.
Because they're like
technology in that they're just putting so much effort into just stealing the West technology and
cheap labor and stuff.
Yeah,
so they started mass producing everything like a decade or two after the Second World War.
Gibson.
But it's like it was almost like a joke, wasn't it, in the 90s? Like, I remember you growing up, Drew, when like things like Poundland stores first became popular. If you ever bought anything in a Poundland store and you looked at the bottom, it'd be like made in China.
Yeah.
And it would almost be like a joke, isn't it? It's like something you want something cheap, and that just it's made in China, always made in China,
It's crazy.
But they would just be mass producing all this stuff.
So is that what like grew them as a country and as a population? Then was the success of their like mass producing?
Yeah, pretty much cheap labor.
What I want to know as well, like we were saying about communism, and it's almost like everyone gets the same and stuff. Like in China, because they're obviously a communist country, but they have so much so many like businesses and manufacturing and things like that. So is it the same?
It's really weird.
Because there's still some kind of like.
I only know a limited amount of it about it, but I can't.
It's not like everyone is on the same page over that. Like
they
can still create a business and like.
I remember hearing that they have a very unique type of communism, and I can't remember what decade it was. I can't remember if it was like the 80s or the 90s, but they realised that if they became if they stayed strictly die-hard communist in the traditional sense,
they wouldn't grow.
That they wouldn't ever be able to rival America. So they've got this like.
It's communist, but they're taking parts of like
like when you go on like a computer game, you've got the default settings, but then you can customize them to your preferences. They like customize the communist settings to their preferences. So it's like it's mad, isn't it? It's like it's a communist.
It's called socialism. That's what it's got here. China operates under a type of communism called socialism.
Mate,
with Chinese
communism is extreme socialism, mate.
Yeah.
So communism is extreme socialism.
This is a variant of Marxism and slash Leninism.
Yeah, I mean, so communism already is an extreme form of socialism. So that's why it's sorry, that was it seemed really cool. It's called socialism.
Yeah, socialism with Chinese characteristics. That's strange that they don't have like a proper name for it or anything.
Yeah, well, I think the blueprint essentially is communism, but then they've changed it to become more business-like. Right. Because as I said, like they realised that they wouldn't ever be able to compete fully with the US if they didn't start adapting their ways of doing things. So they became, as you said, more business-like. Yeah. But it's very strange because it's almost like the general rules for the population and that are very communist-based, but then like. There's still that opportunity in the business sector. Yeah.
And like you can go to China, you can visit China and stuff as well, can't you? And like go on holiday there and stuff. And there's like kids that come over who are from Chinese schools and things like that. And it seems like there's my idea of like socialism or communism isn't like isn't like what I see sometimes with like China, and like, you know, that you could have like Chinese restaurants and stuff, and people that are owners of Chinese restaurants. And
what's it called? Haven't they got like a social credit system in
China? I've seen that, and that was like with the whole because there's like the digital yen, and that was what I was saying about you know, like a central bank digital currency that has full control over the population like digitally. So they've got like a social credit system that can all be, and it's all with the money as well. So because it's a digital yen, it's like you can get turned, like you could get your money turned off in a certain store, or that if you had too many stakes, and that's like. That's a scary thing.
That's like totalitarian. That's dictatorial. Totalitarianism.
With the money side of things as well. Like you just completely, you know, you get points for how green you are.
Oh my god, it's mental. And apparently it's like even mental things. So it's essentially like, as we said earlier, what, you know, the problem is when people say like, this is what's right, this is what's wrong. Say going to prison in the UK if you do it for a social media post, or or whatever, things like that, which is really concerning. That's actually happening in the UK and has happened a couple of times. But the idea that the state and the government basically say this is what is considered good and this is what's considered bad, and if you do not adhere to that set of rules, basically your insurance goes up, your mortgage goes up.
It's just a way of getting you to do something, like, you know.
Apparently it's even little things like if you don't like if you cross the road and it's not a green light, apparently they do it for that. If you're caught doing it on the CCTV.
But on a smaller scale, it was almost like that with like when we went through COVID and stuff, and like, you know, with the vaccine and that, and it was like you had, if you were certain like of a certain job and that, you just had to have it, like, and if you didn't, you lost your job. It was just like a massive way of getting everyone to do something that they wanted to do, and it was like, oh, in the good faith of like, because they want everyone to be healthy in that. But then if you were really concerned about it and you didn't want to do it because there wasn't enough tests and and then all the stuff that's coming out now about it and that, it's like you were like demonized, or like it was a way of getting people to do like an agenda that you wanted, and they made it very hard, unless like I feel super lucky, like that you weren't. You're in a company where it was still your choice.
Yes,
but so many it wasn't. Like if I was still at Hinckley and that, like I would have just been fired straight on the spot. I lost my job, lost my income,
screwed.
I'd have been in a cardboard box on the street. You know. Like,
well, yeah. I mean,
not really. No, do you know what I mean? But, but it's like you get your whole life uprooted and uplifted.
Yeah.
So that was almost like there's a way things like that can sneak into like our society still, but it must be like that next level over there with just like, you know,
I think the thing that
red
bothers,
light you get as well.
The thing that bothers me most about that specific situation, without trying to branch off too much, is the sheer amount of lies that were told to us in hindsight by the government. That, you know, the fact that it was pushed,
and you talk about government trust and stuff, and like why we have lost more trust in the government,
and the government,
things like that.
The government have shot themselves in the foot, because I think like there's been a massive shift even in the last 5 years, which is obviously a relatively extremely small amount of time. Where a massive part of the population now don't trust the government, which would have probably said that they did trust the government pre-COVID, and you know, but how can you blame anyone? They've shot themselves in the foot. The fact that some of the lies that immediately most stick out to mind, the fact that they said that at first they were trying to push that if you got the vaccine, it means you wouldn't have been able to spread the virus, right? Which, if that was the case, you could have seen there would have been a very good sort of moral reason to get it. We know though that that's absolute horse balls. You know, it had zero effect on transmission. You know, the only thing it affected was how severe it was potentially for you getting it. And if somebody doesn't want to get something, well, if it only affects you, who the hell are you who are you to tell them what they should put in their body? You know, like if it has 0 point, you know, but it was aggressively pushed that if you don't get it, you're selfish and immoral, and you're putting the elderly and children at risk and stuff, all this stuff. But the fact that we know that is absolutely complete rubbish, and
it's only hindsight years later that you will see that.
So I think the fact
there wasn't enough time to test it properly,
that is a massive lie, and that is disgusting. That lie was pushed. And it's nobody's business, and it does make it shady of why they wanted us to get it, because, you know, as I said, and the thing is, I'm not particularly pro or against either way, because I think that if you want to get it, get it. If you don't want to get it, don't get it. All right. So I'm not like, I don't have a dog in the race, so to speak. What I have object to is the government lying to us, most likely knowing that they were lying to us, and then using nationwide emotional blackmail, which is something that you'd usually associate with like a toxic freaking partner in a relationship. Like nationwide emotional blackmail to try and get what you want out of people.
The relationship with the government's getting toxic, man.
Oh man,
it's like
you need to break up with them.
Yeah,
you need to break up.
And
with
like
them.
and everything we were saying about like the army and that, like if you. Like you say, that like the army is almost like an arm of the government, like that they're enforcing like the agenda of the government and stuff. Like if there was a people's army, like, you know what I mean?
People's army.
I get behind that. But if you're getting behind the government's army, like, I don't get behind that. You know what I mean?
Start the PB army,
and that must be like how. Branches like form and like civil wars like.
Well, yeah, I mean we talked a bit last week, didn't we, about like why did Japan go to war with America? And remember I told you that it's like I actually sort of like feel bad for the Japanese, like in the lead up to the Second World War, and you can actually see why it happened, and like the West were almost to blame for it a little bit, because remember I told you guys that like
to be more like the West.
They wanted basically to be accepted by the West. They actually started their own democracy, and they just wanted like Britain, France, America to open up trade with them, open up travel with them, and just sort of to be accepted. And to be honest, we were like a bit racist towards them. I think that's the crunch of it. It's because they weren't like white people the same as Americans.
Yeah, now look at it now. Like it's like they have been accepted and kind of like it's like this is the more healthy way of it.
But unfortunately,
it had to go through all that crap.
Unfortunately, it caused 2 atomic bombs and like mass scale war to achieve that goal, which is awful. Where was I going with my point? What was I saying about Japan? About bombs?
Like
yeah. So like obviously like I feel bad about the fact that like we did have a hand in that happening in Japan, but the nationalistic parties that arose in Japan, which led to them becoming the West's enemies in the Second World War and ultimately led to Pearl Harbor, were because the people were so disillusioned with the government and felt so disrespected, not just by the other countries, the Western countries, specifically America, but the other Western countries as well, but also with their own governments that were almost like allowing them to be disrespected. That ultra-nationalistic government rose up and overthrew the country, and then you had these super diehard like samurai,
more
almost
like extremists.
Yes, extremist samurai. Or like, okay, well, these people don't respect us, so we're just going to rule, by might and bring
don't
back
even
these.
Mind a kamikaze here.
Exactly. So it's like, but that happened almost like through, like if that could have been avoided. That's what I'm getting at. And the same way that like we shouldn't. It could have been avoided that the mass distrust of our government in this country could also have been avoided if such things like nationwide lying wasn't accepted. Another thing that really
it's not a very honourable thing in like what you think of Britain as.
And at the end of the day, you got to bear in mind
it's moving away from those values that we always have had, or what we seem to that got us where it got us like back in the day, like in the golden era.
And I think a lot of things that winds people up, like normal taxpayers, about these things as well, just like the police I was saying earlier on, is all of these people's salaries come from our taxes. So these are the people that are taxing us.
They're taking our money and then they're doing something really nefarious with it as well.
They're on bigger wages than say at least 90% of the population. Because I can't remember for like but the higher politicians are like on well over 100k a year, aren't they? I can't remember what it is exactly, but. So, we're on well over 100k a year for taxpayers' money to be a career politician, which in itself I think is almost like a weird thing. Like, I'm like, don't get me wrong, obviously I get what it is, but I think what I mean is I think it's like, it's almost like a strange thing to like, I'm going to be a career politician, and then, to not have the public's best interest, or to say that you do, but to go about it in nefarious means. And I think one of the other lies that really bugged me about the whole COVID thing was, do you remember when it came out, it was leaked that COVID didn't spread from somebody eating a bat, it spread out of a lab in Wuhan. And at first, anybody that even said that, like not even said like, oh, this is definitely what happened, because let's face it, you couldn't say for certain at the time in the UK. All you could say is there are reports that this has happened, but anybody that said there were reports coming out this was actually spread from a lab in Wuhan, you're a conspiracy theorist, that is rubbish, you're a far-righter, nut bar, all this stuff, tinfoil hat, blah, blah. And now, yet again, just like with the transmission thing, the fact that the COVID jab doesn't stop transmission, that's like basically a fact as well.
It's crazy. It's a crazy period of history to have lived through, isn't it?
Mental. And the fact that it was like, as I said, the mass propaganda of like 1 in 10 people are gonna die in the UK, and you cannot meet up socially. But then that thing that came out afterwards of like, you know, like Tories and that were just having parties.
Yeah, man.
You know, they were just having parties and stuff. Like, it's crazy. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's gonna go down in like a history book. It's like in 100 years' time.
We were duped.
People were gonna look back on it and be like, that was pretty mental.
But then, it's insane the level we went to with it as well. Like, like you wouldn't see anyone.
Yeah.
Like even your friends that you like. I remember I would. Because I almost had sort of the common sense of thinking this is a bit silly at the time. Because I remember I would speak to friends and be like, you've not seen anyone in a month.
Yeah.
I've not seen anyone in a month. I'm not going to give you COVID, vice versa. But people just, they had such faith in the government at that time, didn't they? They would just go along with sort of whatever was the case, whatever they were told to, really.
I think one thing obviously that really makes me feel annoyed in hindsight is, as well as like for me, like I literally, the first lockdown happened something like 2 days after I had Evie, my daughter. And as I'm sure you can like hopefully empathise with now, Drew, is like if you put myself in my shoes of what that was like, and then imagine if all
especially what you're seeing in that,
like, and all you're hearing everywhere is like COVID could kill you. If you take COVID home, you could kill people in your house. And I'm like, there's already all this like. It's like it should be a nice pressure, but in that regards, obviously for me, it really wasn't a nice pressure. There's like all this like new thing, you know, you're first time dad, you're learning how to be a dad, you know, you're trying to be like supportive and be the best person you can be in that situation. And then at the same time, it's like, if you leave the house, you could die and you could bring things home and you could kill anybody in your house. And it's like, I'm like, I don't want to kill my kid.
But that's what I mean. That's like the emotional blackmail part.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, and that's wrong in itself, you know. And
I often think,
of course, that's going to make you feel those things of like, I need to protect my family.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's where they got everyone. You know?
One thing that I almost like, wish about that whole situation. If it's not plausible, obviously, but hypothetically, if it would have been really nice for me to have had that experience, not literally having a newborn child at the time. Because if so, I think my attitude towards the whole thing would have been, I think it would have treated it much more of like almost like a funny holiday type. Do you know what I mean? Like I would have probably gone and done like wild camping and just done like a lot of like random stuff. But instead, you're like at home with this baby, and you know you're trying to like keep the baby calm and that, and do you know what I mean? It was very stressful, you know, and it's just, and obviously
not even being able to go in together to appointments in the hospital and that, like that must have been like a real horrible and stuff.
Oh, really weird, mate. Yeah.
And
if you think something like that was to happen again now, what do you think the reaction would be?
I think if people weren't dying on the streets, like, because I it was very controversial at the time, and like people were like arguing with me like viciously on socials and stuff like that. But like I didn't feel that the whole thing was as bad as it was.
It wasn't like the end of Nosferatu.
No, and
you know, like Nosferatu, when it's like the plagues and everyone's just dead in the street.
I remember reading about the Black Plague and like, you know, and the armpits and the boils on the armpits and all that. And I just like could feel intuitively just with what was happening and what you're seeing in the world and everything, even like speaking to people at the hospital, and they're like, oh, it's not being overrun, they've got empty wards and everything, and it's like you know, but people couldn't go to there was more deaths because of like not being able to go to like cancer appointments to figure out that they had cancer and like heart attacks, all that stuff. Like it all got disrupted so much that people were dying more through things because they couldn't actually go because of these COVID rules than people were actually going because of COVID. And it didn't feel like it was a bad thing. And the most people that died, it was almost like because they were like the weak, and it sounds harsh, but like because they had underlying other health issues. Because it's like they've got things wrong with them anyway.
Like,
they're ill people. Like if you're quite healthy, or there's much less of a chance of you actually like perishing from COVID.
I think
you could feel that. But I think, you know, like that was. It didn't feel as bad as it was being made out to me, and I still stand by that now. And it showed, and it was true.
You are
as
right.
Well.
You are right.
But so I think if it happened again, unless people were actually like dying, and unless people were actually, you know, like the Spanish flu, like what that sounds like, and influenza, and these horrible diseases that have actually happened and that have actually killed like hundreds and thousands of people in savage ways. Unless it's something like that happens, I don't think people will buy into it as much as they did with COVID.
And it's one of those things things, isn't it? Unfortunately, hindsight's always 2020. I say unfortunately, obviously it's better in its hindsight than never. But anyway, we have all this data now, which really sort of backs up everything. But I mean, I think like the average age of somebody that died of COVID was something like 82. And as you said, I think that pretty.
Did they really die of COVID? Was that just like the icing?
Well, I think it was a lot of them. Essentially, it's almost like a lot of these people had their leg out the door, so to speak, of life. Yeah, foot out the door, and that's sort of like finished them off. But I think a lot of people already had like. A lot of people, at least, had multiple underlying conditions. So maybe had some sort of heart disease, had some. There are obviously so many conditions, different health conditions
that would make you more vulnerable to it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think like the average age, as I said, was people that are super old. I remember, and it's very, very strange, isn't it? It's very visceral. When you are shown a graph of something or of saying data or something, it seems more important. Then maybe relatively it is. What I mean is, what I'm getting at is what you were saying about how they had all these graphs every day about how many people were dying on COVID on the news. Everywhere you looked, you couldn't open up Google or turn on the telly without seeing something of it, or go on YouTube even without seeing something about it. But if you looked at how many people died every day from car crashes or died every day from cancer, you'd start freaking out about that. Yeah. But they don't do that. So as a result, you're not walking around everywhere going, oh my God, I'm going to get hit by a car today. Or, oh my God, I might drop down.
You are walking around going, oh, COVID's going to get me.
Exactly. But I remember one thing that I thought was crazy, and I can't remember why I looked into it. I think it was because I think I'd watched a podcast and they were talking about the dangers of people that take paracetamol and painkillers too often. And then that sort of tweaked a thought process in me. And I remember thinking, because I don't really take painkillers, like ever, unless I'm like literally on death's door, like that one every couple of times, every couple of years, where I might get like savage man for the sun, like I'm talking savage, but like otherwise I just won't take.
Pop a Nurofen or two.
Well, no, I won't even do that. I'll just take a paracetamol. Like literally, the most crazy thing I'll take is a paracetamol. I
think I'm addicted to Nurofen.
Yeah,
no, not really, but I reach for them, man. Like,
reach for them, man.
If I get a bad headache or something, I've always.
I remember you used to do like a couple of ibuprofen and a couple of paracetamol. I remember you do sometimes.
Yeah.
I'd say like you do it, but do you know what I mean? It'd be like I'd be with you and you'd be like, you have like a mild headache and you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna take them. Whereas like I remember thinking to me like, oh that's great, like, I wouldn't take that unless I was really bad.
Headache,
but you didn't seem that bad to me. It was almost like you were like, oh I've got a bit of a headache. Oh,
I don't even want it to be bad, so I'm gonna take some just so it's not.
Yeah, exactly. But so after I read or I listened to that, I did a load of research myself. Because obviously it's always really important to do your own research. Don't just like take people's word for it. So I did all this research, and I remember I ended up coming in on some information which I thought was fascinating, and it was how many people died in I think 2020 from paracetamol overdoses. So I'm not talking about painkillers in general. Paracetamol is obviously the weakest one.
Yeah,
it was basically. Your body can shut down if you take too much paracetamol, right? And a lot of people, it's a little bit like, chasing the dragon. You like people convince themselves they've got some sort of pain somewhere, they'll take paracetamol. They've got even more pain, they'll take even more paracetamol. Eventually, it's the paracetamol which is causing the pain, not anything that you've got. And it was basically saying, like, long story short, what I'm getting at is more people died from paracetamol-related overdoses in 2020 than died of COVID. But I remember when I read that, I was like,
what?
Whoa, that really puts things into perspective for me.
Yeah.
And yet again, I'm not necessarily anti-vaccine. Like if you listen to this, want to take, I've taken a jab and you're glad you took it, then I'm a liberal guy. So like, a bit like what I said earlier.
Decision.
You do. Yeah, let's go with what I said earlier about like why people, whatever people's sexual preferences and that will never bother me. Like what you decide to do with your body in your own time, whatever, as long as you're not hurting anyone else, do what the hell you like, right? So I would never judge somebody for taking a vaccine or anything like that. But I think when you hear things like more people died in 2020 from a paracetamol overdose, which most people would not think to wouldn't give a second thought about just popping a couple of paracetamol. Yeah. That more people died from paracetamol overdose than died of COVID. That is crazy to me. That's a crazy statistic.
Do you remember when I was ill in December this year?
Yeah.
And
you were really
around
ill,
Christmas
and you
time.
gave it to me.
Yeah, sorry, man.
I think. Well, I don't know for sure it was you that gave it to me, but you probably was.
Yeah,
I got ill about a week after you did, anyway.
I had way too many paracetamol then.
Oh, you tripped out, didn't you?
Mate, I felt like I was like dying. I felt like I was rotting. That's what it felt like.
Didn't
It
I
was
speak
like,
to you and you said something like you'd taken a certain amount? And I was like, mate, I don't think you should take that amount. And then you were like, let me
think
double
so,
check.
yeah.
And then you checked and you'd accidentally taken double the daily dose.
I was taking like
and then you were like, man, I'm not feeling good. Now, I remember we were going to do a show or something. And I was like, don't worry about it, man. Because you were on Riverside, and I was like, mate, go to bed. I'll do it on my own. Like,
I don't even really remember what I had at the time, but it might have even just been like a man flu. But I remember like at the start I was sort of taking it because I was pretty savagely ill already, and then it just got to a point where I was just a bit like confused, and just a bit like I don't really know what's going on, but still feeling really ill. And then we sort of figured out about the paracetamol and ibuprofen or whatever because I was taking way too much of it, and I just felt like at the time like everything inside me was rotting. And stopped taking it altogether. I was like, man, I'm just going to stay away from that for the moment because that definitely isn't right. And as like a few days passed and I was just better. And it was definitely like I was definitely making myself worse with that paracetamol. But it goes to show like how easy it is to do.
Reminds me a bit of like the moral of the story is that there was like I can't remember what dynasty it was, but there was a Chinese emperor like 1,000 years ago or something. And he became convinced that some mystic or something told him that like mercury was the key to like immortality. And he started taking mercury like every day. I can't remember if he was just ingesting it in liquid form or whatever, but he was somehow ingesting mercury. And obviously mercury gives you mercury poisoning. And it can cause you you can literally die of mercury poisoning. That's why they say not to have too much like fish and that, isn't it? Because if you eat too much fish,
levels in there,
there's too much mercury levels in the sea nowadays, and then you eat it through the fish and you can get mercury poisoning. But he started taking this mercury, and then obviously started getting sick. And then he started panicking and taking more mercury, so he would get more sick. And then the more sick he got, the more he started panicking and taking more mercury. And then he just killed himself. And obviously the irony is that he wouldn't have died if he hadn't taken the mercury, but he was convinced that the mercury was the thing that was going to save him, but the mercury was the thing that killed him. It reminds me of that,
That's
you know?
crazy.
Yeah.
That's like me and McDonald's.
You and Big Mac. To be fair, Big Macs are so good.
Yeah.
But to be fair,
B numbers in there, man.
But to be fair,
It's
though,
not good for you.
You can definitely make like a better Big Mac equivalent at home.
Yeah,
Because I think
I know.
one of the things I love most about Big Macs is the burger sauce, the Big Mac sauce. In McDonald's, they call it Big Mac sauce, but you can buy burger sauce. It's just called burger sauce anywhere.
Very similar. Yeah.
And it basically tastes exactly the same, doesn't it? And just buy some really good quality beef burgers in the supermarket. Get some nice buns and like whatever your preferred, roughage is in it. Onions, lettuce, whatever, tomatoes, cheese. Just make it at home.
I remember hearing something about the chips, and I can't remember how many it was, but there was something like 20 different ingredients in the chips from McDonald's.
That's crazy,
and it's like, really, it should be potatoes and
a bit of
tallow.
oil. yeah, or tallow, yeah.
Imagine,
Some
that
sort
would
of
actually
oil.
be good. That's what like RFK was saying. Is like it used to actually be good for you because it was potatoes and tallow. They used to use tallow as the fat to like burn that thing, and that's like a healthy animal fat. And so it's like good for you, but we've turned it into something that's really bad for you,
Yeah, I can't remember. There's something they like genetically modify the potatoes as well or something. Did you know that?
No,
Because you know, like every potato, and the thing is, it's not a big deal. Like it's really weird, but like sometimes potatoes will have like marks on them and stuff.
they want the perfect potato.
They're like anti-mark, so they've like genetically modified the potatoes so that they're all like perfectly beige. But it's like weird. But I think that like something to do with the process or something, they have to like do something to them, and it's not really the best, because if you just buy a potato in the supermarket, obviously it's fine. It's like, it doesn't have any of that weird stuff. That's not like genetically modified. Yeah. But I remember hearing that it's like it makes the potato, I think, less nutritious, less healthy, something like that.
Yeah,
a bit mental though, just because
goddamn mental.
obviously a potato in itself, there's nothing unhealthy about a potato, really,
Vegetable.
Yeah, I suppose unless you have too much and you're getting too much of that glucosey
spike. But that's like because I always go back to one of the main things I say is like calories king. So as you said, like if you have too much of anything, it could be a bad thing. Because one of the main thing that causes your all-cause mortality is just being, say, like obese. Do you know what I mean? And in that regard, it doesn't really matter what you're eating. If you're obese, you're obese.
You're still fat.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that's what's pushing up all those possibilities of like heart disease and cancer and all that stuff.
Yeah, slow killer.
Yeah. So like, don't get me wrong. Probably better, obviously, to be like really fat and eat nothing but fresh veg than it is like McDonald's. But
too far gone that much.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's like exactly. Exactly, but anyway, I think we'll probably leave it there for today. But that was an interesting pod, guys. That was an interesting pod. I always think it's really interesting, as I said, thinking, debating the moral implications of stuff. Like, as I said, like that thing in Dresden, like, was it necessary? Oh, yeah, just to say as well, like on a thing about that. So, the West, like the British, were almost like pressured a bit into doing that, the bombing of Dresden. There was this meeting, during near the end of the Second World War, between Joseph Stalin, I think President Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill, and he didn't feel like the West were doing enough at that point because we'd won the Battle of the Bulge, and that pretty much destroyed the army on the Western Front, but there was still a big battle going on the Eastern Front, and a lot of Soviet soldiers were dying. So Joseph Stalin almost like got a bit eggy at this like meeting and was like, look, there's still a lot of Soviet soldiers dying, like you need to do something to help me. And then they were thinking like, well, what can we do? And then Winston Churchill was thinking like, okay, well, we could bomb the hell out of Dresden because a lot of the supplies that are getting to the Eastern Front are coming out of the supply chains from Dresden. So there was a lot of pressure on the Brits. So I think it's important to take all these things into account. That's what I mean. Because I think a lot of people nowadays, especially for like super woke, you would just hear bombing of Dresden. It was a Nazi city. It was an artsy. Well, it was a Nazi city as well. It was an Nazi city. 25,000 people, most of which.
That's insane. That's like more than half the Blitz.
Yeah,
in just one event.
That's
crazy.
And then you think, oh, it's awful. That was really immoral, awful of Britain to do that. And I'm not saying it wasn't, but you got to take all these things into account. You know, we were sort of pressured into doing it a little bit by the Soviet Union. And it almost went too well. Like the British weren't anticipating the bombings to go as well as it did. It ended up being, as I said, being literally almost like a perfect storm of events, like temperature, wind current, lack of defenses on the day. Like it was a perfect night in every regard. So it ended up going better than expected, if you want to call it better. Better from a purely successful bombing point of view. They did not expect it to go as well as it did. So there's like many different factors. Apparently after that, after Dresden, apparently like Winston Churchill was like really troubled by that, which I think, I think is good because it shows that he wasn't a psychopath essentially. Do you know what I mean? Like, because obviously when you are the prime minister of a country or a president of a country, you're the one that's signing off on all of these things. So I think the fact that he obviously had a moral, almost like a bit of an ethical and moral crisis. He was thinking like, was this the right thing to do? And apparently he was like quite depressed about it afterwards because he felt very, just didn't necessarily know if he should have done it in hindsight. But then you've got to ask yourself as well, there's literally video footage you can watch. You can probably find it on YouTube. If not on YouTube, you can find it on documentaries and stuff about World War II, where Hitler's on camera saying things like, if the Brits drop 19 tons of bombs on us, we're going to drop 100 tons of bombs on them. And they were the ones that were like trying to invade Britain, cause the Blitz, cause the death of over 40,000 British people, all of this stuff. Like, would they have cared if, say, the situation was reversed? I certainly don't think Hitler would have done. I mean, Hitler and all of his like highest up in the cabinet, like Goebbels and that, they were like all psychopaths, man. They're all psychopaths. They were all absolute psychopaths, and I don't think that they would have cared about doing the same to us. And don't get me wrong, two wrongs don't make a right. And I don't think it's always good to go for like an eye for an eye. But what I'm just saying is you have to take all of these things into account. The beginning of the war, we were losing the war. We were lucky that we were winning the war by the end. And in a way, had the privilege of debating a moral issue like, is it morally acceptable at this point to do it? Do you know what I mean? In that regard, it's actually a privilege to be in that situation. It's better to be in that situation than to have your country conquered and to have your civilization destroyed and be put under a 1,000-year Reich, which is what literally Hitler was going on about. He wanted to start a 1,000-year Reich where it was like, Nazi rule, everything like that. All the, not to mention as well, the fact that if not only, while we're feeling bad about Dresden, which as I said, I'm not saying we shouldn't, but not long after Dresden, it was when the Yanks and the Brits and the Soviets started uncovering all these concentration camps and led to the discovery that like 6 million Jews, Slavs, and like people with genetic deformities were like systematically killed in concentration camps. Yeah. Like 6 million.
Yeah. You can't even, I can't comprehend it.
Yeah, it's uncomprehendable.
And apparently they literally put because the concentration camps themselves like attracted like the basically the worst people in society, because they put obviously almost like job ads out and stuff like that to work in these places. It attracted all basically the psychopaths in society. So you had people like
psychopath's playground.
Yeah, you had people like Josef Mengele, whose literally nickname was the Angel of Death, and apparently he would just torture and do these weird torture and do experiments on, say, like dwarves. Apparently there's like a famous quote of like a dwarf who I think managed to survive the Holocaust, went in there with his family, all the rest of his family were killed, but this one dwarf survived. And apparently he remembers Josef Mengele saying something like, oh, this is fantastic, I'm going to have 20 years of fun with you lot. Like really chilling. And what obviously meant by that, he was going to do all these genetic experiments and torture them, and just weird.
So did we not know about the concentration camps at all?
No, not until we uncovered them.
That's crazy.
The Nazis tried to keep them a secret. Yeah. And it's like, it's mad. And say some of the footage of that is awful. And say it was mainly Jews, but also they had this obviously because they wanted to like do like genetic, they wanted to do what's called eugenics, so like pure breeding and all this stuff. So they also, awful, man, because you can literally see black and white footage of some of it, and it's heartbreaking. You can see like footage of like young kids with like, like autism, like Down syndrome, like severe autism, Down syndrome, other genetic defects, and they're like in concentration camps, and they're like German kids. But they just were like, no, we need to get rid of all that. We need to get rid of the Jews because they're like an abomination. Get rid of the Slavs because they're subhuman. Get rid of anybody with a disability. And it's like, oh man, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. So, as I said, I'm not saying that, as I said, that's why I say with all these things, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. There's so many factors. There's not like a right or wrong answer, but it's so interesting to ponder all of these things. Yeah. The moral and ethical implications of all of these things. When does doing something not, suddenly not become right? What makes something right? Like all these different things. Really interesting. Anyway, guys, we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us on another PB. We love you. Go give us a follow on our Spotify, YouTube, Pandora's Box podcast, also Instagram. Do we ever use our TikTok at all anymore? Is that just dormant?
We've still got it, but it's dormant at the moment.
Yeah,
we
should probably start
into
Yeah, there's nothing to stop us just uploading clips.
No, absolutely.
There'll just be loads of clips on the website. Anyway, guys, you can follow us on TikTok as well. You're listening to AW Radio. That's where we go out on first and foremost. So listen to AW Radio. Always bringing out the best music, different genres, new music, old school classics. But it's good. If you're looking for a good radio station, listen to AW Radio. If you need any professional services, check out Aspen Waite, complete business growth service. We'll handle your accounts, research and development, tax, any of that good stuff. We'll sort you out. Until next time, have a good one. We love you. Ta-ta.